Hi guys, welcome back to another video on Project Darwin. And today we'll be talking about the open oceans. By the way, if it feels like I randomly pause, it's because I have hiccups. Anyways, into the video. The open oceans of Darwin would be almost completely empty, just with some groups of the Pterobrachium and Vermicorpus that have explored outward here. One group of Vermicorpus would go through a long evolutionary train, going through a lot of changes. Speaking of changes, let's go through all of those changes. To be more suitable for these new environments, they involve 6 fins for them to swim with. They would use fin-driven swimming. They would also evolve a proper jaw, but because of how their throat structure works, it would be easier for them to have a left and right opening mouth instead of the mouth opening up and down like on Earth. They would evolve 3 eyes, which would be connected to their brain. Yeah, you heard me right, brain. Not a nerve ball, not a nerve net, a proper brain. One last thing that would change is counter shading. These 7-inch long creatures with a powerful underbelly, which would resemble how lighting would work on this planet. They are called Pisces corpus for their fish-like behaviour. It's very likely that one group of Pisces corpus might evolve to feed on Cerebrachium and other Pisces corpus. Because of the larger size of these two animals being 8 and 7 inches, this means this creature would have to evolve to be decently sized. It would evolve to be at least a meter long. His body would become more elongated, his arms would become larger, and it would evolve a couple things which are also revolutionary for Darwin. So it would evolve the first skeleton on Darwin. Everything else so far has been supported by hydraulic systems or exoskeletons. This group, called Maxilla Pisces, would evolve a cartilage copper mix. Because of the purple blood already kind of tells us that there's a lot of copper on Darwin. So they'd have a cartilage skeleton infused in more vital parts of the spine with copper, just so it's easier for them, just in case they have to fight or when they're hunting at high speeds. Their teeth are made out of a similar mixture. They also evolved to breed in a different way, which would help them not attract scavengers to eat their young. They would connect tails like dragonflies on Earth and release both cells into the body. Another thing that both of these creatures would evolve are a better respiratory system, similar to fish on Earth. Meaning that these two creatures would have high advantage in the open ocean world, but they're not the only ones who have reached the open ocean. Apart from Axillopecies and Pecies corpus, there is also a brachium called forest brachium. This creature evolved to be more squid-like. Two fins, but the eyes are still there, and its reproductive tube. They'd still reproduce in a simple way. They would simply go up to each other, spray their stuff to reproduce. Their blue blood would make them even more squid-like. They would evolve to be 16 inches, would still sometimes get hunted by Maxillopecies, but would also be a predator of Pecies corpus. Something I would like to mention about Maxillopecies and Forest brachium is because Darwin is actually a tidally locked world, these two would be living on the outer zones. With Pecies corpus, those organisms would live in the colder, darker zones, where everything else lives in the more bright zones where the light hits it more often. There would not be much on the darkest sides of Darwin, meaning that these would probably be the equivalents of Arctic oceans. On Earth, so these outer areas where these two exist are pretty much the borderline for life. To explain that a bit more clearly, the way that these animals' bodies function don't allow them to go any farther into Darwin's dark side. Luckily, not much of the continents are locked on the light side. Most of them, apart from the northern continent, is slightly on the darker side, but it's still on the verge of life. I don't like to keep on this tangent for too long, but to explain, some places on Earth just can't physically support life. Like some very, 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 very deep parts of the ocean, some very, very cold parts of Antarctica, just can't really tolerate multi-celled complex life very well, meaning that on Darwin, there would be like a physical line. Well, not physical, but population-wise, it'd look like there was a line. On the dark side, it would still be microbes. On the light side, it would be where all the animals would thrive. Brachium is the only animal that gets slightly into the dark side. Next episode, I'll probably try and make a diagram. Now, it's very likely that plants would follow into the ocean soon enough. Descendants of Pteronum planta, Texas Proteata planta, still can't pronounce it, not to be confused with the extinct animal from millennia ago now, is a kelp-like plant because from the darker side it has as much light-absorbing cells as possible. Everything but the root system is a light receptor, so it gets as much energy as possible. One group of species, Corpus, would evolve to live amongst them. Piscis species, whatever it is. Piscis, species, I don't know. Habitapecies evolved to live around these tall plants. The shading is not as visible because it doesn't need it as much, and its body is much darker to help camouflage. It also reproduces in the same way as Maxillopecies. Speaking of Maxillopecies, because of all the corpses from these larger organisms like Maxillopecies and Fortis brachium, one clade of Maxillopecies might evolve to eat these. Or Vorax species might be the longest name I've made. It is a half-meter organism, meaning it can be preyed upon by Maxillopecies if it isn't careful. It reproduces in the same way as Maxillopecies does. They feed on bones and corpses. Their top eye is most dominant because it wants to be able to spot Maxillopecies from above. Its two other eyes are almost vestigial. Now, the deep sea. Deep sea is a very hard place to live, but it is easier to live on than the dark side of the... This is probably where you'd see the most adaptable life that is multicelled. One group of species Vita would evolve to be small enough to survive in the barren abyss of the ocean floor and the deep sea. This would be called Parvin species and would be 1 inch long. It would still have blood. It would reproduce like Maxillopecies would, but it would be almost colorless. They are not completely endemic to the deep sea. They can sometimes explore the open ocean. One group might evolve to be bioluminescent and fully adapted to the deep, dark waters. Candidiasis species has some bioluminescent spots. It reproduces the same way, it's the same size, and it's bioluminescent. Just like its ancestral creature, it will school up in large schools. They feed on marine snow. Hamobrachium Hamobrachium is a descendant of Carphtatius corpus, I think that's right, which is for the deep sea. It has hooked arms to cling onto corpses. It is the apex predator of the deep sea as of now. A huge extinction event would be caused at the end of this period that I will be calling the Piscean period. The Piscean period would last from, if we're going to use episodes as an example, the Piscean started in late episode 3 and ends in episode 4. The Piscean was a long period, but in the time of YouTube episodes it wasn't. But the end Piscean extinction event was the opposite of the Piscean explosion, which granted us all the life you've already mentioned. The lack of the oxygen in the water would kill off most primitive life. I shall name every organism which is extinct now, why they're extinct, and what animals are alive and why they are alive. The other ancestral Planivita clades like Sauropod and Teslocorpus were still very primitive. They had no pressure to evolve in time before this, meaning that they never adapted. Latorosaurus, Nacrobrachium also went extinct because they had not very good breathing systems. Leaving Photrusbrachium as the last. Prototexavitium, which is the proper name I've given to any descendant of Protexavita. And to a stretch, you could say Protostbrachium is the last remaining ancestral Primumvita. Corpus went extinct. Yes, and strategies would do nothing to help it in the lack of oxygen. Meaning Hemobrachium is the last of the bilateral. No, that's the opposite. Meaning Hemobrachium leaving Hemobrachium alone as the sole survivor of the radial Planivita in the depths or alone. Now for the survivors. Thermocorpus just bred too much and had a more efficient breathing system. Nothing got crazy. Same with Piscicorp, Maxilla-Pisces, Ostevarax species, and all the other descendants had such an efficient biology that they came out almost unscathed. Photrusbrachium, its large size and the large long gill-like structures it has function like lungs, like they're shaped like lungs at least. The large size of them allowed them to take in as much oxygen as possible, allowing it to survive. The deep sea organisms only survived because of their small size. And that is it for today. In the next episode, we will talk about fresh water and the first plants on land.